Energy, a critical resource in the development of nations. From time immemorial, the development of nations has been linked to the supply and use of energy. Access to energy is a key pillar for economic development, poverty alleviation, and human well-being. Ensuring everyone has sufficient access to energy is an ongoing and pressing challenge for global development.
Without energy, you're going nowhere to start with. Let's get it clear.
It's so critical to industrialization to have electricity. We cannot do without it.
Energy sits at the base of economic development. You need electricity to develop industry. You need electricity even for human development, socioeconomic, health, education, etc. You need that. Even for tourism. For countries that even rely on, let's say, financial services, you still need electricity.
Practically every country that I can think of or imagine, has been able to move from developing to developed status and thereby create prosperity and wealth because they've had, good enough energy supplies.
Look at the Middle East. You really didn't know about Dubai some 20 years ago. It was nothing. It was just really plain desert, if you will. You can think about even Nigeria. You can think about the advanced countries. They were not as prosperous as we see them today. Energy and the use of energy, for that matter, has really transformed all of them.
When we look at it within sort of our peers, the people that we started off from with, then of course you can mention your Malaysias and then your Singapores and the Taiwans. And when we come into Africa itself, you can talk about South Africa, also having, made a bit of that transition.
Even in Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, Ecuador, Chile, for example. Yes, they all have very good track record, but it's all because they built a very well-founded economy on an energy base.
There's a direct relationship between adequate energy supply and economic growth. If we do not have the energy that we need to be able to move industry, to be able to move manufacturing, to be able to move even simple provision of services, then we have a direct impact in GDP, and then we are affecting our economic growth.
It's fundamental. Without enough energy supply, you cannot drive industry, and therefore you cannot also have or drive development.
The global energy mix is made up of several fuels, non-renewables, which include fossil-based fuels like coal, oil, natural gas, and renewables, which include hydro, solar, and wind. Some of these have become more important than others over time. In the early 20th century, the world's first hydroelectric plants were built. Nonetheless, coal was the dominant energy resource until the middle of the 20th century, accounting for almost half of global energy demand. After World War II, nuclear power was introduced for electricity generation alongside the traditional energy sources such as coal and oil. However, as a result of the Arab-Israeli War in 1973, the Arab countries, the primary producers of oil, stopped supplying the world market with oil, sending prices skyrocketing.
It created a huge energy crisis the whole world over. All of a sudden, even in the United States, people were queuing to buy, gas or petrol for their cars.
And that then meant that countries that hitherto were entirely dependent on crude oil for their primary energy needs, but also to an extent even nuclear energy, had to diversify these energy sources.
Natural gas became a preferred fuel for power generation, providing improvements in thermal efficiency as compared to conventional power plants.
It's clean, it's relatively cheap, and it's also very fuel efficient, especially when it's being used for thermal, power generation.
Back in 2012, early 2013, oil prices were costing about $119 to $121 a barrel. Okay, power generation plants at Senate Energy, where I worked at the time, need about 150,000 barrels of crude oil every month. I mean, we were spending almost $18 million or more on crude oil a month. Compare that to natural gas. I mean, at the time, the price of natural gas was about $8.84, right around that time for $8.6 per MMBTU. For the same plant, you would be saving almost about $18 million per month in generation costs.
The largest natural gas reserves are found in Russia, Iran, Qatar, and the United States. Currently, the main producers are United States, Russia, Iran, Qatar, and Canada. The highest consumption is by the United States, Russia, China, and Iran. Many more countries are encouraging the exploitation and use of natural gas, particularly developing countries.
Gas, for me, is the bedrock of industrialization. As a matter of fact, we all keep saying oil and gas, oil and gas. But I think the time is coming where we just will be saying gas and oil. Because if you look at those countries that have developed, gas has been the fuel of choice.
Despite the exploration and use of natural gas, those countries that do not have the infrastructure to monetize their natural gas assets are simply wasting the gas by flaring.
Part of the constraints primarily have to do with infrastructure, because you need infrastructure to get the gas once you've extracted it, you've processed it, to get it to the ultimate end user.
Natural gas can be burnt directly to generate power and heat, converted to gasoline for transportation fuel, or chemically altered to produce petrochemicals such as fertilizer and plastics.
Natural gas probably is the pole for industrialization. You can use it for both agrochemical and petrochemical needs as a feedstock. You can also use it for combined heat and power for things like mineral processing. You've heard about bauxite. It's going to be heavily dependent on the use of natural gas for both heating and power needs. Also, natural gas, if you go to the Asian countries and some African countries, and soon to join them Ghana, it's also used for vehicular transport.
So it's an important ingredient in developing, call it an industry-based economy.
Natural gas is traded differently from crude oil. Given its gaseous nature, it cannot simply be loaded onto a ship or train for transportation from source to consumer.
You cannot build long pipelines to transport this gas from, say, Ghana to Europe. It becomes much difficult. So it's more used and traded on a regional basis.
Russia, Turkey, that European region, they have their regional market because they have developed the infrastructure to link those particular countries together, so they are able to transport gas within that region. And it's the same when you go to the US, North America, it's the same when you come to the Middle East. In Africa, we are yet to develop the gas market to that extent.
However, now we have, the technology that allows us to now move gas over different distances and long ones. So you have the LNG systems, and technology that, you just basically will compress the gas, put it into a big tanker, and you can move it to different markets.
And then you regasify it and then use it. Now, LNG has actually shaped the gas pricing dynamics and actually the supply-demand dynamics around the world. Because now it's easy to actually transport gas from where they have predominant resources to where it is needed the most.
We've seen over the last couple of years a much more global market emerge for gas.
Industrialization-driven economic transformation is directly linked to the availability of adequate power supplies. As an energy source, natural gas can catalyze a nation from developing to developed status.
If you look at the rise of the Southeast Asian, economies that countries like Ghana like to compare themselves to, one of the critical catalysts for that development, process has actually been the availability of enough energy that one is competitively priced, but also has security of supply attached to it.
It means everything. It is impossible, I should say, to develop a country without affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy supply. Simply put,